Welcome into the Fantasy Football Forge. My name is Steve, and it is time for the DSTs. We're going to go through all phases of this series of videos that I've been doing. We're going to do some rankings here. Actually, we can just get rid of that row. So 4 tiers for the top 4 tiers of DSTs. After that, basically, I don't think that they should be drafted, at least in most formats. If you are more curious about some of those later tiers where I might have some teams that you think more highly of, you can go check out on the website, www.theFFforge.com. There's a link down in the description to the website that you can also check out. And the rankings should be up on the website. Other than that, you can also find all of the other rankings for every position: quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, running backs. I've done videos for all of those. I've done the tier videos, I've done sleepers, I've done busts, and today we will also be looking at the sleepers and the busts of the DSTs. So let's just get right into this. These are DSTs. We don't want to waste too much time spending thinking about these types of things, but I do get questions about them quite a bit throughout the offseason, so I am more prepared this year to go about it. And right off the bat, the New York Jets are my lone S-tier team here. I really don't have any questions regarding them and their ranking. I'm confident in it, so that is how we're going to do it. That's going to bring us on to the Dallas Cowboys, who I am highly confident in. I will be talking about them a little bit more later on, so we'll just leave that for then. New Orleans Saints, I'm questionable on. Obviously, still going to be fairly highly ranked here, but I do have concerns there. Cincinnati Bengals, I'm going to have in my questionable tier. Once again, if there's any of these that are surprising to you, you'll probably be hearing about them in the sleepers or the bust portion, right? So that's to bring us on to the Miami Dolphins, who I also have questionable. So these are random down here, but not completely random. We'll see. We're going to go through a lot of potential teams that I say that. I mean, I think that they do have the potential to break up into a top 12 type of DST. So that begins with the New England Patriots. That's going to continue on with the Detroit Lions. Houston Texans, yep, they're going to be in that potential tier, not quite in that questionable tier for me. Chicago Bears, I put them in that potential tier. We'll hear more about them. Indianapolis Colts, right in that potential tier. Green Bay Packers, on the lower end of this tier, but there is some hope that this defense could... there's a lot of talent on the defense. They haven't performed up to that talent. New defensive coordinator. So it could take some time for that to take effect. But also, it could be pretty immediate with the talent on that defense. So it brings us on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers potential. Similar thing, just... less upside, in my opinion, but they could be solid. That's going to bring us on to the Baltimore Ravens, who are going to be highly confident. This has been a year in and year out. There's always just a very good defense in Baltimore, but there have been quite a few losses. So, they're just not quite S tier for me, and that's going to be a bit of a pattern that we'll see for some of these highly confident teams that... there's some question marks. So that's going to bring us on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Put that in the potential tier, also on the lower end of that tier. This is pretty close, if not in the order that I have these guys ranked there in the potential tier. San Francisco 49ers is going to be another one that I'm highly confident in them, yes, but I could see them slipping a little bit. They've suffered some losses in the past couple of years, not as complete of a DST as they have been, unless some of players that they've been drafting really step up and maybe perform even beyond where they got taken in drafts. Then the Cleveland Browns are also going to be in this tier. I am, incredibly, confident about them. I think they're a very good defense, and the only question mark here is just going to be, is the rest of the league going to kind of catch up to what this defense is doing? They get highly aggressive, which can mean that you get you allow the big play when you get highly aggressive. Might that happen at a slightly higher rate this second year if they don't come with enough counter punches to surprise offenses? I think that is possible, but a defense to be highly confident in. Buffalo Bills, same story here. They have suffered some losses, but we'll actually talk about them, I know, a little bit more. Pittsburgh Steelers, another team that, they just always have a good defense, basically always have a good defense, and expecting that to be another solid unit again this year, and if nothing else, overperform. Las Vegas Raiders, I do have them in my highly confident tier. Clearly, we will be talking about them in the next portion. Kansas City Chiefs are going to make it there year in and year out. They just are a good defense. They have been for a while. They've been, I think, a little underappreciated. But several times when Patrick Mahomes hasn't been performing, they've stepped up and they've been the better unit on that team a couple of times in Patrick Mahomes' history. And they were once again last year. Suffered a huge loss in the secondary. How well will they be able to recover from that is a question mark, but I still think there's enough pieces around that they should be fine. And Philadelphia Eagles are going to be in this questionable territory here. Last year, things did not go to plan. They were a unit that had a lot of high expectations. I don't think it was all talent that caused them to be as Swiss cheesy, as poor of a defense as they were. New defensive coordinator in there. I do think that this unit has obviously a lot of talent. You know, talked about the Green Bay Packers with a lot of talent. Philadelphia probably more. And they should be able to turn it around, but they're coming off of a really poor performance last year. So there are questions there. Let's move on to I believe it will be the bus portion first. All right, here we are. Like I said, bus portion first. You can see the LA Chargers are up top. A couple of things for this section. First of all, you can see I have the ADP 23 there for the Los Angeles Chargers, average draft position. And then that next number that you see over to the right of the little straight bar is where I have them ranked. So throughout the busts, that number should be larger because I have them ranked lower, as in I am expecting them to perform worse than the where they are currently being drafted. Also, when I am referencing the schedule, what I used for the schedule was the opponents over the first 8 weeks for the teams, as well as the playoff schedule, so the final 3 weeks of the fantasy football season, which is for the final 3 weeks of most leagues' fantasy football season, which is the playoffs for most fantasy football leagues. It's not for one of mine. You know, some of us, when we have different settings in our leagues, we just get left out, but we try to touch base for the most common, settings here. Then statistical outliers in 5 categories of those for, each of those 8 weeks and the playoffs are used, and they're weighted differently based on what is more reliable to repeat and based on the impact of DST scores. The 5 categories that I look at for the DSTs are the sacks allowed, interceptions thrown, offensive passing touchdowns, rushing touchdowns, and then total fumbles per game, not fumbles recovered, because that's a bit random. But fumbles is a little bit more steady, not a highly reliable statistic regardless. And of course, things change, the interceptions thrown, things do change from year to year. Sometimes there's just a totally different quarterback helming the team. So it's not a perfect system, but some version of this system I have been using for over a decade and has worked really well to unearth some later round DSTs that I've been able to take, or sometimes I haven't quite trusted it, and then at the end of the year it's like, oh, they were a top 5 DST. I should have trusted the system. So it's a system that's worked quite well for me. I really like it. I've evolved it. I think it's better now than it used to be. I definitely go into more depth as far as the analysis on it than the original inception of looking at this. One more thing, so we're on the same page when I talk about DVOA, that is defense adjusted value over average, which is a calculation of how successful a team does in every situation compared to the league average. So in third and longs, what is the normal, how many yards do they typically get on this play? In this situation, did this team do above or below average in that? And then all those numbers get calculated down into one defense adjusted value over average number. So that is how that it's just a very good statistic. A lot of times, the teams with the highest DVOA do tend to be the better teams for fantasy football, but it's not a 1-for-1 ratio, and sometimes there are outliers here and there, and so that is something that we're looking at for a predictor of the future, of did a team maybe overperform or underperform last year compared to their DVOA. And there we go. So this starts off with the bust with the Los Angeles Chargers, ADP 23. I have them ranked 28th. I don't think that they're going to be drafted in too many leagues, so we're not going to spend any more time on that one. But the Miami Dolphins are a team who will probably be drafted in most leagues. Average draft position currently is 9th. I have them ranked 13th overall. And so, I talked about the schedule when I look at my calculation of how good or bad a schedule is. They came in 20th, the 20th worst schedule in the league, so it's not a favorable schedule, somewhere kind of towards average, though. Miami finished as the 5th ranked defense at the end of when everything's said and done at the end of last fantasy football season. However, via the DVOA, they significantly overperformed as a top 5 defense, finishing 19th via DVOA. So a big separation there, big difference in the reality compared to the actual reality. Two different realities. The expectation versus the reality. There we go. DVOA being the expectation. And via the PFF rankings, this is a middling defense entering the 2024 season. Significant injuries at the edge last year that will not be coming through fruition. They won't be better and healed until later on into the season, if at all, for at least one of them, are going to be, impacting this defense, though they did make an effort in the draft and in free agency to make up for those losses. So we can't completely say, well, they don't have any edge rushers, because they did make an effort, at least, to get some help in there. On a positive note, aside from the help that they brought in, I think that the new defensive coordinator is going to be a better fit for the players that they have on this team, and therefore I do think that there's a chance that, the DVOA number at least will be looking better, maybe closer to like 13th or so. So I'm, obviously it's not like I think this is a bad defense having them ranked 13th here, but fantasy-wise, a little bit of a tough schedule, some losses that they're going to be trying to overcome. I don't know how well they'll overcome, but also different coaching staff in here. That's what I came to. 9, just a little bit rich for me. It's nothing ridiculous. Let's bring us on to the Chicago Bears, who finished 19th last year via fantasy football rankings. Via the DVOA, they finished 17th last year, and aside from an incredibly strong linebacker unit, their secondary is pretty mid overall, and their defensive line is near the bottom of the league as an entire unit. So you can see the Chicago Bears currently going ADP DST 13. I have them ranked 17th, a little bit further back, a little less confident in them just making some sort of full turnaround given the team that they have. In terms of the defensive line, they have invested heavily in the previous 2 drafts. So they're hoping for a big step up from some of their youth, and some people drafting them might be expecting that big step up. Me personally, I didn't really I liked that they were investing in their defensive line. I didn't like the individual players that they were taking, and so far, with those guys entering into their 3rd and 2nd seasons respectively for some of the players, they haven't really done too much to improve this defensive line. So far, it's not like they're guys that I'm expecting to get a whole lot better because I loved them in the draft process. No, I didn't really love them in the draft process for where they went, at least for the Chicago Bears. Now, what I will say as a positive, they did look strong at the end of last year down the stretch, but when you look at that closer, the negative side of that is that they looked really good against a not too tough schedule in general there. During the final 8 games of the season, they faced Atlanta, Cleveland, Minnesota, Carolina. Think of where those teams were with their quarterbacks at the second half of last year. Did I say Arizona there? Atlanta, Arizona, Cleveland, Minnesota, and Carolina. Then they also played Detroit twice and Green Bay once, like final game of the year for Green Bay. So while Green Bay's on that hot streak, they did keep Green Bay down to like 17 points or less even. And Detroit was a mixed bag. One game they allowed like 31 points. One game they allowed like 13. So it's not to say that they can't do it. They can't be a better team, but it was not the best. It's not like they performed against all of the best offenses in the league. We'll just put it like that. And then when you look at their schedule this year, they actually do have a favorable schedule. It's the 10th best schedule via how I looked at their schedules. So Chicago Bears, some good, some positive, some projection going on. to me just a little bit rich there at ADP 13. This is going to bring us on to the Houston Texans, who I have ranked 16th, ADP 10. So this is why they got up to second in my rankings here. Definitely a big separation between myself and where they're getting drafted, and a bigger warning here for you. As far as the Houston Texans go, they finished 14th last year, DVOA. They finished 16th, so that's right in there. Once again, I think that we have a middling unit. I don't think that they're like some incredibly better unit than last year. However, I do see more potential, I guess, for them to be better than like the Chicago Bears, which is probably part of the reason why, I have them ranked higher, why the ADP's higher on them. And another reason that I am higher up on Houston is the head coach. I mean, they're set up for success defensively in terms of the coaching. We'll just put it like that. However, on the opposite end here, they do have the 24th worst schedule. It's not going to be some easy schedule for this DST to perform week in and week out for you. And so that is a bit concerning once you're that far back. That's, getting into the statistically tougher areas there. And looking back on this, I do think that I would push Houston back at least behind the Bears on this list, because I do like a lot about this defense and its upside. And so I guess, how I have them ranked speaks a little bit about the fact that, I do feel more confident in the Houston Texans than I do the Chicago Bears. And so it just comes down to, it was a bigger spread is why I originally had Houston higher on this list. But I do want to point out, I'm talking about it. There are some things to like about this Houston Texans defense to be excited about, to think that they could finish in this top 12 here, where I'm less confident about that with the Bears. And that's going to bring us on to my number one bust DST here, the Indianapolis Colts, who are going 12th overall. I have them ranked 18th, behind the Bears, behind the Texans. So I think it makes sense here that they would be my number one bust warning here. This is a unit that overperformed last year. They finished 10th in fantasy football, despite having a DVOA of 20th. So bit of a spread there. I think we can feel comfortable in saying that their fantasy output was better than their actual performance should have led to. This team has drafted a lot of players that I like over the past 2 years, but they're still not a very strong defense overall. They have an excellent defensive line, but behind that is one of the worst performing units in the league via PFF grading. So, they're going to have to take a step forward this year, and I'm not quite betting on that as highly as some other people are, despite really liking their drafts. And the last time that I really liked defensive drafts, and I liked Houston's this year a lot, the last time, and obviously they did, got a couple of good players last year too on that defense, and some guys who have kind of underperformed that we're thinking that they could be better from 3 years ago's draft for Houston. Both of those units have the potential to definitely perform up in this area. I get a little bit more questionable as we move up. But, that's just how I have my rankings. Also, I want to mention here that I am avoiding the Dallas Cowboys, the Baltimore Ravens, and one of my sleepers is actually on my avoids list as well. But for me, Dallas Cowboys, Baltimore Ravens, just a few too many questions. Dallas Cowboys is a defensive coordinator change. How is that going to work out? It could be, it could work out for the worst, definitely. They've been a pretty aggressive. I think the coaching has had a lot to do with all the turnovers that the Dallas Cowboys have had over the past couple of seasons. And once you reduce that, you reduce the defensive touchdowns that they've gotten, which have been pretty high. They may not perform quite so well. But they are also getting one of their best defensive players back that was missing all of last year. Baltimore Ravens, however, lost a lot of players and defensive turnover. This is a unit that could just be kind of mediocre for fantasy football. It's just hard to go, it's hard to rank them any lower than where I have them ranked as a top 5 unit. And they do still have a lot of talent. It's just, there's a lot of things working against it to make it more of a possible middling defense. So now bring us on to the sleepers here. The New York Giants and Denver Broncos are at the top of my sleepers list. They're still low enough that I'm not suggesting that you go out and draft them. And, I don't think that you are going to draft them, so we don't need to spend any time on that. But we can spend some time on my first team, the New Orleans Saints, who are actually also a team who I am avoiding despite them making my sleepers list here. They are a middling team. They were, I should say, last year, a middling team via the DVOA, despite a top 8 finish in fantasy football. And they have a top 10 front 7. So, the front 7 units are still very good. But I'm not sure if this is still the case in terms of them being the oldest defense in the league like they were last year. But I have to imagine that they probably are, because they still have a lot of returning players from that, because of how they built this team, from that unit. From last year's units, which are, once again, quite old at this point and getting long in the tooth. And that concerns me, because each of these guys starts to continue to take, little steps back. You'll lose that athletic edge that you had when you were younger. Eventually, especially if it's, 5 of your 11 starters, that can really, hold back a defense's upside and make them more middling. So I do feel like that might be coming for them. And they have one of the harder schedules, 19th worst schedules. So the Saints are just a team where I do think that there are arguments to take them higher. But for where I have them ranked 11th overall, they're going 15th. I'll avoid them. Should be happy to get them, though, at ADP 15. You should be happy to get them. So they're a sleeper, but I'm avoiding them like where I have them ranked, I guess, is more how that works out. That's going to bring us, and even then, there's a couple of teams who I'm going to be targeting that I think I'd rather get than these Saints. Going to bring us on to the Cincinnati Bengals. They have the single best schedule by an absolute long shot, and so that went a good ways towards me ranking them higher. But it's not the entire reason why I have them ranked 12th compared to their ADP of DST 21. I'm not going to argue this ADP. They finished 18th last year in fantasy, 23rd via DVOA, so they even overperformed a little bit at DST 18. But I do expect them to be better. They've taken quite a few players that I like over the past few years in drafts, and as I was starting to say with Indianapolis, Houston, the last Baltimore Ravens and the Kansas City Chiefs were the last 2 teams that, like, year in and year out, like, yeah, I love those players that they're drafting, and a lot of them ended up turning out to be quite good. So I like to think that I've got a pretty good eye for these things, and I have still some faith that some of these guys might, have not shown us their best, but they have not performed well enough to keep this Cincinnati defensive unit as high of a performing unit as they were just a couple of years ago. They have not filled the boots of the guys that they have replaced, even though they've been drafting these guys even a year in advance sometimes as replacements for guys who they know are leaving, which is, good business, but you get the wrong guys and it just doesn't work out. So that is the risk here. Hopefully, I have some faith in this instance that they're going to turn things around and be better players than they've been so far in the NFL. So their entire defensive unit is still ranked rather well. They're on the higher end of being middling, 12th, 13th in the league or so, and you combine that with a really favorable schedule, and I think that they could overperform and end up as a top 12 DST unit with a little bit of luck, which it always takes that for some of those touchdowns to come through for these DSTs. But it is a risky unit, and I'm not, trying to undersell the amount of risk that you would be, taking on by taking the Cincinnati Bengals as your one and only defense at DST 12 here. It is risky, and that's why I have them down 4th on the list, despite having them ranked higher than some of these units. So that's going to bring us on to the New England Patriots, who I ranked 14th. ADP is 20th on them, and they way underperformed last year, finishing 25th, but they were 9th via DVOA. It's just a really bad year for the New England Patriots. In a lot of ways, things just didn't go well. They do have the 13th best schedule, kind of borderline top 12 schedule there. Pretty much average schedule. Still, I think that they're an above average unit and total on the defensive side, and this should be a seamless transition from Bill Belichick to Gerard Mayo. So there's a lot of reasons to think that the New England Patriots can be this same stout defense that they have been in year out for the, well over a decade now, for the past 2 decades. So brings us on to the New York Jets. ADP 4. I'm ranked first, so they do make this sleeper list, and I want to explain. I've said some of my concerns for like the Ravens, Dallas, San Francisco, even although they're not quite on my avoid list or anything like that. These are like the 3 teams that people will be taking ahead of the New York Jets, right? Yes. And they've all had losses over the past few years or major changes to the staff to bring uncertainty to them, as I've talked about. So to me, very clearly, even just stand alone with ignoring any like major changes to the coaching staffs, just the players on the field, the New York Jets have, I believe, clearly the best unit, and they have the continuity of the coaching staff as well on that side of the ball. What I will say is it is the 17th hardest schedule. So, once again, middling of the league schedule, but it is on the actually, my bad, I remember that incorrectly there. It is still on the positive side overall for the end number that I get for those schedules. So even at 17, I could have said it's the 17th easiest schedule since it's technically on the positive side of things there. And for the Las Vegas Raiders, they came in as my number 1 team. I kind of showed that out of order, but there we go. ADP 14, so they are getting some respect, but I think more respect should be put on their name. I have them ranked 8th, and they are going to be one of my targets. So they finished 7th last year, DVOA. They were 8th, so they did not overperform according to DVOA for where they finished in fantasy football. And this year, I have them having the 8th best schedule, one of the better schedules. Via PFF, they have the 10th best defensive unit on a whole, and I don't necessarily disagree with that based on how they performed last year, which is, of course, what PFF is looking at. And I think that they've gotten some, decent additions in on that defense that could help round things out. So, or guys who could still perform better. So like I said, Raiders are going to be a target of mine. So are the Buffalo Bills. If the Bills drop just a little bit, if I'm getting antsy on taking a DST, I do have them ranked higher than the Raiders yet. So I would take them. And I do think that, so Buffalo's ADP is 8th, where I have the Raiders. I have them ranked 6th. And I think that even that could be a little bit low. I do think that they have a shot at being a top 3 DST. So Buffalo Bills have the 2nd best schedule via, how I did the scheduling, looking at that number. And then they finished 3rd last year as a DST, although they were 12th via DVOA, so they did overperform in that statistic, in that grouping there last year. But hey, we're not having to draft them 3rd overall. You can get them 8th overall. Then they lost some guys this offseason, but they went through hell in the injury department last year. Their depth was tested, and their depth passed the test with flying colors. So, what are we really afraid of in terms of the guys who are going to have to step up in starting roles this year when they already passed the test? Like, the guys are ready to step up and make this continue really this defense being a strength of this team. Via PFF, they're still the 5th best unit in the NFL, and I agree with that. And their coaching has always done a great job of getting the most out of these defensive units. So I'm, pretty confident that this Buffalo Bills unit's going to be a good unit again, and they have a good, easy schedule on top of that. So that goes a long ways, and there we go. Those are my sleepers. Those are my busts. Those are the rankings. I will be doing a player highlight video later on this week. That'll be a part of a new series. We'll be going into now draft strategy analysis for the rest of the off season and doing live drafts. So come visit me on Thursday for a live draft. I will be here Thursday night. I think I'm going to stick to 9 o'clock Eastern. Maybe I'll move that up to 8 eventually, but for now, let me know if you would prefer it at 8. But for now, I'm going to keep that at 9, so that way West Coast gets a chance to get in while they're not on their drive commute back home. So there we go. Thank you very, very much. Peace out.